Hi guys, today I have a very cozy bookish video for you. Grab some tea or some coffee, get comfy and cozy because we're just gonna talk about the books that I've been reading recently. I read 4 books in the month of April. I also did some shopping this week at a few used bookstores, so I bought some new books. So I'm gonna give you a little haul at the end. I also made a little wish list of books that I really want to read in the near future, and I thought I would just share that with you guys in case you're interested. I was beginning to think I've been reading just a lot this year, and I think it's kind of pointless to just read, consume without reflecting on the things that I've been reading. So I thought I would challenge myself to now write a diary entry after every book that I read. There's a quote by Joan Didion, which I will read to you right now. I think it's quite applicable for this video. She says, "I write entirely to find out what I'm thinking, what I'm looking at, what I see and what it means, what I want and what I fear." So I want to review each of the books that I read this month and also share with you the diary entry that I wrote about them. So these are the 4 books that I read in April. I feel like I read so many good books this month. I loved each and every one of them so much. The first book I read this month was The Idiot by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This book presents the idea of a positively good man entering 19th century Russian society. We follow the main character, Prince Mishkin, who ends up coming into a large sum of money. At the very start of this story, he becomes deeply infatuated with a woman, Nastasia Filipovna, who also has a line of suitors begging for her attention. This is a woman who had a deeply troubling childhood. She was basically taken in by this other man who was basically raising her for his own sexual pleasures. And Prince Mishkin, he sees this and he just wants to be good and kind to her, and this totally ends up backfiring for him. The world Dostoevsky builds in this novel is so extremely immersive. I love these over-the-top characters. He has a way of describing faces in this novel that makes you come up with visions of humans in your head that you have never even seen before. There's that, this is what makes reading feel like magic, is you're literally creating stuff in your mind, and I really felt that while I was reading this book. I think this was one of my favorite novels I've ever read. It's definitely on my favorites list now, and I will read you the diary entry that I wrote upon finishing it. It's a Thursday night, almost mid-April, and I live in a world that is riddled with mundanity, but what I do have is good literature, and with that, I can go anywhere. I'm very theatrical in my diary entries, by the way. I have spent the last 2 weeks in the underbelly of 19th century Russian society. In this cruel and compelling world lives my dear Prince Mishkin, a man who is naively good-intentioned, a man whose persona is often compared to Christ himself, charitable, kind, without judgment. But a person like this seems to crumble in a world where good intentions are not only questioned, but also have the receiver assuming a lack of intelligence. Mishkin reminds me of the Disney princesses I grew up watching. Naive, kind, and always good regardless of the circumstance. But in the end, he is not rewarded with a happy ending. In the real world, his kindness causes chaos. I deeply loved this book. It made me question my own worldview and confronted fears that I didn't know I had. And in that, I might actually be able to find a way to overcome them. At one point, the fatally ill character Ippolit is discussing his dying manifesto with Mishkin, and he expresses this feeling of not being able to fully translate what is within his soul. There will always be a piece that is left unsaid, that can't be untangled from the bramble of his mind. This chapter brought me personally so much comfort and understanding because, to quote James Baldwin, "You read something which you thought only happened to you and discover that it happened 100 years ago to Dostoevsky." This is a very great liberation for the suffering, struggling person who always thinks that he is alone. This is why art is important. Art would not be important if life were not important, and life is important. I love that quote so much. Stories are sacred, and I will keep this one with me forever as it continues to bleed into my soul and change me for good. So that was The Idiot by Dostoevsky. Literally 10 out of 10. Recommend. The next book I read in April was Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. And fun fact, this was actually the first novel that she ever finished, and it was one of the last ones to be published after her death. It's crazy to me because she finished this when she was 24 years old. Can you imagine? I just think age is so confounding to me sometimes for some reason. This novel was a satire of a classic gothic romance novel, but More so, this novel feels more like a coming-of-age story to me. Of course there's romance, it's a Jane Austen novel, but to me what makes this book special is there is that like certain grit and feeling of like coming of age and exploration for the main character. It follows a young woman, Catherine, who loves to read, and she's like finally getting to experience life outside of the small countryside village that she lives in. So she goes to Bath and she meets all sorts of characters. She becomes really good friends with an Eleanor Tilney, who happens to be the sister of her love interest in the story. After Bath, she ends up going to this manor in the countryside that they live in. This is Northanger Abbey, and she goes there with this family, and she ends up finding all sorts of family secrets, and it's kind of like this gothic mystery story. It's very enticing. I really enjoyed this one. So I'll read you what I wrote upon finishing. Another book finished, another journal entry to begin. How am I to know how it is I feel about a thing until I write about it? And I suppose most importantly, how am I to remember? The story must run through me like wine through water, and then it must translate into ink on page. It's Good Friday, and I just spent the morning finishing Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. The first chapter solidified my infatuation with our heroine's journey, as was stated. If adventures will not befall a young lady in her own village, she must seek them abroad. The first half of our story takes place in Bath, one of the most delightful cities in the world, a city in which I have had adventures of my own. A constant theme in this novel seems to be our heroine discovering the true colors of the world and of people around her. She comes to know herself, and in that she is able to see others with clarity. The second half takes place in a gothic manor filled with beauty and terror that we find in pockets of mystery as the story unfolds. Northanger Abbey highlights the importance of reading. Our heroine escapes into the world of books to avoid her mundane life, and soon her own story becomes a satire of a gothic romance novel. In this novel, Jane Austen reinforces the notion that to read a book is to read the world. Quote, "It is only a novel, or, in short, only some work in which the greatest powers of the mind are displayed, in which the most thorough knowledge of human nature, the happiest delineation of its varieties, the liveliest effusions of wit and humor are conveyed to the world." In this story, we see the dangers of mixing art and reality, but we also see the horrors of avoiding the fact that life itself is a work of art and that stories not only embellish the world, but reflect it. I should like to have my own Jane Austen-esque romance someday in my travels abroad, and I will remember to avoid unchaperoned open carriage rides, overly eager and vanity-driven fathers, and of course, the John Thorpes of the world. Okay, the next book I read this month was The Double by Dostoevsky again. So this is one of Dostoevsky's earlier novels. This was written before his time spent in Siberian prison, which I feel like is important to note because that affected a lot of himself and the way in which he writes, of course. So it's interesting to see some of his like larger existential ideas begin to seed in his earlier pieces. In spring, I always imagined myself reading light, optimistic, and romantic novels like that of Jane Austen, Dodie Smith, or L.M. Montgomery. But alas, my shadow has pulled me back into the dark underbelly of St. Petersburg, Russia. Another Dostoevsky novel finished. The Double lays the groundwork for early absurd existentialist doppelganger literature. In this story, the fumbling hero, Mr. Golyatkin, is confronted with his double, a man that is a mirror of himself, and in that he enters into his very own self-proclaimed nightmare of the mind. It's never quite confirmed if the doppelganger actually exists. It is as if he's being haunted by himself, as he realizes that he does not fit into the society in which he lives. This novel explores the deep and dark side of the living human consciousness. It questions what is real and what is a dream, and most importantly, if that blurry line even signifies the way in which it can affect you. So one of the first lines in the book already questions the reality of the story that is about to unfold. It was a little before 8 o'clock in the morning when titular counsel Yavok Petrovich Galiotkin came to after a long sleep, yawned, stretched, and finally opened his eyes fully. Yet he lay motionless on his bed for a couple of minutes, like a man not yet entirely sure if he has woken up or is still asleep. If everything that is now happening around him is in the waking world and in reality, or is a continuation of the disordered dreams of his sleep. So this was The Double by Dostoevsky. I really, really enjoyed it. One of his shorter books, so if you want to read a piece of his that is a bit shorter than The Idiot or Crime and Punishment, I think this is a good place to start. It's not quite as good as the other Dostoevsky novels that I've read that are like post-Siberian prison, but it was still interesting to read some of his earlier work. Every year I go through like a fixation author, and I think reading The Idiot sort of solidified that this year is going to be Dostoevsky. I don't know if you guys remember, but like last year I was like obsessed with Virginia Woolf, and I was just like reading a ton of Virginia Woolf novels. So every year I kind of just like get really into one person. Honestly, I allow those curiosities to take me places, and I will fully indulge in them as much as I can. You'll see in my reading wish list later on that I have a lot of Dostoevsky novels on there to read this year. Okay, next is a book that I have been wanting to read for such a long time. This is The White Album by Joan Didion. I bought this 2 days ago and I finished it today, so I completely wolfed it down. This is a collection of essays that recounts Joan's unique observationalist view of California in the 1960s and the early 1970s. If you've read anything by Joan Didion, I think we can pretty much all agree that she's like the coolest person in the world. She has such a distinct voice, and I'll just read you what I wrote about this book. It seems impossible that a girl such as myself has gone this long without reading The White Album. Although I think this about many books, and hopefully I will have a lifetime to read them all. Maybe when I'm 70, I will finally read all of her twists and ask myself the same question. Joan Didion has mastered the art of journalism. Her essays have momentarily transported me to California in the 60s and early 70s. She writes with such truth and clarity, and though her writing style is journalistic and pragmatic, it is not without feeling. It is her deep observations of minute details that add emotion and significance to the stories she tells. Only Joan Didion could possess me to read an entire essay about the California water system and keep me deeply enthralled throughout it. She's always leading you somewhere. She's always connecting the dots. But my favorite part of this book was not the title essay, The White Album. It was in fact the third essay in the book, Women, highlighting the women's movement, Doris Lessing, and Georgia O'Keeffe. She points out how Doris Lessing writes exclusively in the service of immediate cosmic reform, only to create a new way of looking at life. It is, in my opinion, a pure way of creating. It is without ego, and its purpose is for finding and creating oneself. I myself am trying to achieve this point of view, but it is hard to see in truth considering where I'm at on the mountain. She finishes her essay on women by talking about Georgia O'Keeffe. She speaks about her time at the Art Institute of Chicago and how her fellow classmates doubted her skills. One of her fellow students advised her that since he would be a great painter and she would end up teaching painting in a girls' school, any work of hers was less important than modeling for him. Another painted over her work to show her how the Impressionists did trees. She had not before heard how the Impressionists did trees, and she did not much care. After school, Georgia moved to Texas and abandoned the opinions of others to find her own voice. Quote, Texas, where there are no trees to paint and no one to tell her how not to paint them. And to quote the first sentence of this book, we tell ourselves stories in order to live. I would also add on to that and say we must be aware and vigilant to not believe stories other people tell about us. Unless it is Joan Didion telling that story, I would certainly believe anything about myself if it was written in a sentence crafted by the woman herself. So I really enjoyed The White Album, as you can see. If you like Joan Didion, I obviously recommend this. If you've never read Joan Didion, I think this is a good place to start, and I personally look forward to reading many more of her books. Now I have a few books that I recently purchased, so we're gonna do a little haul. There is a few libraries by my house, and I've talked about this many times in my videos, but I will say it again because it's amazing. In these libraries, there are like used book sections, which you can purchase books for like super cheap. Everything is 50 cents, $1, or $2. It's the best thing about my life living here, actually. If I must live in Texas, at least I can get good, cheap books. The first one is This Side of Paradise by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I don't know much about this book, to be honest, but it looked good when I read the back. It seemed like it's kind of the same vibe with The Great Gatsby. I thought it would be a really good book to read in the summer. Another book I got that I thought would be good to read in the summer is Summer by Edith Wharton. Bought this at that little used book section. It was like $1. Thought I might as well just pick it up. It's set in a small New England village, so I love that. I'm seeing words of sensual awakening here in this description, so it's definitely like up my alley of the kind of classic novel that I would read. Side note, love the Oxford World Classics, and I like to collect them so they look like nice and neat on the shelf together. So I'm really excited to read that in June. I also bought a copy of Frankenstein for super cheap. Frankenstein is like one of my favorite classic novels. I have like the Penguin clothbound classic copy, but I didn't have this one, and I like this one because I like the artwork and it's nice to just have like a soft cover version of it. Maybe I'll reread Frankenstein sometime soon. Not soon, because I have a lot of books I want to read, so I have no time to be rereading right now. But maybe next winter, maybe? I don't know. We'll see. So a few days ago, I went to like this really cozy used bookstore. And honestly, guys, April, it's not been bad, but it's just been like very uneventful. So I like to look for like the little things to kind of romanticize my life or just make things special. And I went to this bookstore on like a boring sort of like mundane Wednesday, Tuesday afternoon or something, and I just had such a good time there. Like I was like one of the only people there. I just spent like an hour just like sifting through shelves. And you know when you're at a used bookstore and you just like you're really digging and like looking for something, and it's like it's literally like you're on a treasure hunt because you don't know exactly what's going to be there because it's, you know, it's kind of random sometimes. And that's how I felt, and I almost got into this like creative flow state when I was looking for the books that I wanted. I had a few like authors in mind, so I was, you know, looking in places, but then I would like, it would take me into other places, and it's one of those bookstores that just has like little nooks and crannies. And I was just like in heaven, you know, and then I came home and it was like raining and I had a cup of tea and I started reading the book, and it's just like, it's like those small little things that just make life good. I was specifically looking for a copy of Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. I cannot believe I've gone this long without reading that book, so I was like, I have to find it today. Didn't find Metamorphosis, but I did find Franz Kafka, a biography by Max Brod, who was like his really good friend in life. So I am so excited to read this biography. I love biographies, I love autobiographies, and I feel like this edition is quite rare. I've never seen it before, and I just like found it like hidden in the shelves of this used bookstore. I was so happy, and I'm so excited to read this. Since I didn't find Metamorphosis at the used bookstore, I just went ahead and ordered it on Amazon. So I really love the Penguin Modern Classics as well, with the blue outlining. There's of course the Penguin Classics that are black, but I prefer the blue ones when I can find them. They don't really like sell these in American bookstores. I don't know why. So these will be the two books that I read next. I think I'll go ahead and read the Metamorphosis and then I'll read the biography, or maybe I'll kind of read them at the same time. That might be an interesting experience. I don't know, but I'm definitely gonna like get started on these right away. I'm so excited. I'm sure a lot of you have read Metamorphosis and other stories, so please let me know your thoughts. I would love to hear them. So I'm trying to just like really let my curiosities guide me in the way in which I make choices on what I read. I think it's easy in the age of like book talk and Instagram to like just feel like, oh, that looks like a cool cover, or everyone else is reading this, so maybe I should read that. I think that can be a fine way to get book recommendations. Sometimes I do that and I end up like finding out things or being a part of like a bigger conversation about books, which can be nice. But I also think it's important to like really just follow those like little sparks of curiosity you get, even if it's not like a popular book at the moment. I love a cute cover, but like we must be vigilant, guys. How do you find what sparks your curiosity? There can just be one thing that sparks your curiosity and you follow that, and that thing will lead you to another thing. And you'll just like go down this rabbit hole, and it's like so wonderful. I've been going down many rabbit holes these days, and this is my book wish list. This is just like a little list of like books I'm on the lookout. I like to buy a lot of my books used, so it's nice to just have a physical list rather than just like keeping them in my head because I forget. But this is what I'm on the lookout for. 3 books by Dostoevsky: Notes from Underground, The Brothers Karamazov, and Demons. I really want to start reading Carl Jung books, so I put Memories, Dreams, Reflections, Man and His Symbols, Aspects of the Feminine, Psychology of the Unconscious. I recently read Simone de Beauvoir's autobiography, so I want to start reading more of her books, so I put The Woman Destroyed, The Mandarins, and The Second Sex. 2 Deborah Levi books. I want to get Real Estate and The Position of Spoons, On Love by Stendhal, Black Swans by Eve Babbitt, Talking as Fast as I Can by Lauren Graham, The Third Gilmore Girl by Kelly Bishop, The Diary of Anise Nin, and Near to the Wild Heart by Clarice Lispector. So I recommend making a little wish list if you want to like get those out of your head and onto some paper. So I think that's everything in this video. I hope it wasn't too long. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I want to make more book videos because I think literature is like the thing that I am most passionate about in my life. It inspires my life so much. I like love reading, but I also want to like live a life that is like worth telling a story of, you know what I mean? And like literature inspires me to do that. It fuels me. And you can't travel all the time, but you can travel anywhere with a book. I'm gonna try to do like a bookshelf tour video soon. That's been requested a lot. I just don't know how to do that because I have so many books, but I'm gonna figure something out. So stay tuned. Thank you so much for watching. I love you guys and I will see you in my next one. Bye.